Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today is a Q&A episode, and I think I'm going to go over 5 questions today. Some of them are going to be pretty short. But first, before I do that, if you want to learn more about a body recomp, what it is, how to do it, the things that I teach to truly actually see a body recomp, I go over what it is, how to do it, why we want to do it, misconceptions, and then 10 things that you need in order to actually see body recomp, but also in a way that's going to help improve performance as well as overall health. So that way you can feel good and just crush whatever you're doing. If you're interested in that, the link to that is in the show notes. Again, it's completely free there. So with that out of the way, let's dive into today's question. So first question was around creatine timing. Is it important? Somebody shared a study with me, just asked, actually they shared a post with me and I couldn't actually find the exact study that post was referencing. So I did do a little bit of a deep dive into it. And when it comes to creatine timing, so I already had an idea of where this was at, but I just didn't know if there was any research that I potentially had overlooked. And when diving into it, in the past, there was some potential research showing that, hey, maybe like post-workout is going to be the best time to take your creatine monohydrate. In terms of recent meta-analysis and reviews of that literature, there doesn't seem to be, if there is any benefit to post-workout, it's very small and it's not really worth going out of your way to get that in at that time. So when it comes to creatine, I think the big things are going to be, hey, let's just take it consistently because you do need to take it day in and day out versus it's not an acute thing that you take once and you're going to notice effects, right? Like you need to take it, but you need to take it consistently there. Now, if you have a week where you can't take it, okay, no big deal. I'm not worried about that. It's just, hey, or you take it 2 times a week. Like one, it's going to take you really long time to actually get saturated in your muscles and in your brain if you want it for those benefits. To me, that's a waste of using it. So again, we do need to take it consistently. So for me, it's just, hey, find a time that you can take it consistently, and that's the big rocks. If for you it's easiest to take it post-workout, cool. The good news is you may see a little bit of an extra benefit potentially, but we're talking very small here. So as I said, I would not stress doing that. I just take it whenever. For me, it's usually at night now, and I'm going to keep doing that unless there's research that comes out in the future that's, hey, there's a pretty significant advantage to this that's worth like looking into. Then I may change that. So that's where we're at from a creatine timing perspective. One client asked me this week, what is the difference between tracking and logging? And really and this comes to food intake. And really what I said there was there is no formal definition, but what I meant is like tracking is going to be like, hey, we're really looking into how many calories you're consuming, serving sizes, etc. Whereas logging to me can sometimes be, I don't necessarily care about the calories right now. I just want you to log your food intake and just log what you're eating and don't really worry about serving sizes, things like that. Because you can take, for me, a couple of years ago, just like, hey, I'm super into looking at how many calories, etc., what your calories and macros are. But as I've gotten more into things and learned more, I think it's, yes, calories do matter. Like I do not want to say that they don't, because they do matter. But you can learn a lot about somebody's food intake by just seeing what they're consuming, regardless of calories and macros, right? If you gave me two people's diets, I would be like, hey, this person's going to struggle to eat fewer calories. They're going to be very satiated. They're going to eat in the right amount that they need to just by looking at their food log. And so for me, I've gone more to, yes, calories and macros do matter. And at certain times, we do want to, I think it's a good idea to track them. It's a good learning experience, but not everyone's ready to do that. And instead it's, hey, maybe we're just going to log our food for a little bit. And it's more so just seeing what your food is made up of, because you can learn a lot from that, right? Because it's like, okay, if we're tracking calories and macros, but like you still have if it fits your macros approach, yes, you're going to do a good job of, again, controlling your caloric intake, which can help manage body weight. But again, it may not be the greatest from a body composition standpoint. And it just may be a thing that's going to be hard to sustain, especially if we go through different phases. Whereas if we can see what you're consuming from day to day and what that looks like, again, that's going to line up with, hey, this may be a little bit easier to stick with in terms of your caloric intake, or you're going to feel like you're fighting an uphill battle. Just because, again, I've just seen a lot of, when it comes to just tracking calories and macros, I've just have seen a lot of foods that's, hey, they're high protein, but it's like high protein cereal, which again, that I'm not saying that stuff's bad, but if your protein sources are made up of just whey protein powder, where you add protein to everything that's tasty, high protein cereal, protein bars, it's okay. Yes, you're likely hitting your calories and macros, but we could improve what you're consuming within that there. So there is no formal difference between them. It's just how I conceptualize it. Whereas tracking is, you're tracking every last little bit, right? You're tracking calories, macros, whereas like logging is, hey, we're just seeing what you're eating at each meal. And that's going to allow me to help you in turn by improving. That's going to allow us to get your overall caloric intake in check. And that's going to lead to like more long-term like progression as well too there. So I just thought that was an interesting question to go over. So next, somebody in my community platform asked about hacks or easiest way to track food. They've never really been good at tracking via an app, and they just don't typically. They say it's hard to measure what they've had without being super high maintenance about it. So for some people, I'm just going to go over a few hacks here from a tracking perspective. So one is weekly meal prep helps one person. It's a slog to get the items and portions right. But once I do, I measure and make on Sunday and then just eat throughout the week. So it's just, hey, if you can plan ahead, meal prep and have your food, it's like you can get that all done in one day. And then you don't necessarily need to worry about tracking everything at that point. Another person mentioned, I don't have any hacks, but if you eat the same food, usually they pre-populate, plus you can add a whole meal to another day as well too. This person is a big fan of food scale, and I am too. I think a food scale can really help you figure out portion sizes. So it's like, hey, maybe we get you dialed in on what you're eating, but we're still maybe not seeing the results we want. Hey, let's add in a food scale now. Or for some people, it's going to be straight into, hey, let's add in a food scale. I like to use a food scale for certain items. So then that way I get an idea of what a serving size is. So then moving forward, you can use that in your brain. And then maybe every once in a while you recalibrate there, right? So it's almost a thing where, hey, you use a food scale a couple times for say a week or two, you get that dialed in. Now you have a better idea of what a serving size is, and you can just track that without having to weigh everything every single week. But once you get something new in, then you're going to weigh that out just so again, you can get an idea. Also, it's a good, like another strategy is like, hey, you're just tracking you're tracking everything, but you're measuring out your more calorically dense items, right? Things that are going to be super easy, where if you're off by a serving size, or again, if you just eyeball it, you're going to be way off, then we may to weigh that out every single time. That was something that I was doing for a while, where I would weigh out my oats because that was like the base of this meal that I would have. And it's okay, if I can get that, it's like the big calorie dense thing for that meal is controlled. And now everything else I add, it's not as calorically dense. Not that oats are calorically dense, but that was like the big portion of the meal, right? So that's another strategy that you can do. Or you could weigh everything out for 4 to 6 weeks and then you take a break. There's different ways that we can go about using a food scale, but I do think it is a great tool. I just had a client yesterday talk about how, again, his weight was plateaued, and I was kind of mentioning, hey, let's look at are you measuring food? And he said, yes, I'm measuring it. And then he just reached out and he saw this huge whoosh. One of the things he changed was, instead of just using measuring cups, he actually weighed it out on a food scale, and that made a huge difference, right? So I think the moral of that story is, this is where a food scale can be super helpful. And if you're not seeing your body weight trend where you want, whether that stay the same, go up or go down, you can check yourself by starting to measure out food through a food scale to see what is going on there with that. Again, I think recalibrating every once in a while is a good idea. Or you can take an approach of where, hey, I'm just going to weigh out my more calorically dense items there. Right now I'm in this fat loss phase and I'm not tracking my calories and macros, but if I do start to get to the point to where things aren't moving the way I want, then I may need to start to weigh out certain foods a bit more. So again, there's a lot of different ways we can go about that. So another client did say, hey, it sounds like you need the simplest way to track. I would use a food scale and weigh out everything by the gram. It's the easiest, most consistent way I know. This person said they've been tracking with the food scale for almost 3 years. Like anything, it gets easier the more you do it. So there is something to that too, right? It does get easier the more often you do it. It just becomes part of your habit and it's just built in and you don't really worry about it, right? It's that initial little piece of it can be a pain in the ass right off the bat, but you get better at it. And then the next person said, I wish I had easy ways for you. So that is right. Like at the end of the day, tracking is a pain in the ass. So there's not going to be this like easy way there, but I use a scale and measure in grams for everything. If I make something homemade, I do sit down and I create custom recipes in Chronometer. You can import recipes too and change the ingredients once it's there, which is nice whenever you need to log it. Basically what she's saying here is, I don't know if you want to take small steps, sit down one day and spend some time creating custom recipes for your commonly eating foods just to test it out. I know it sounds daunting, but it really becomes second nature once you have things saved in there. The scanner is great. The multi-select feature, copy to today, makes it faster. So again, there's kind of tips and tricks to use with each app that you use to make that a little bit easier. So you do have that as well too, right? Where certain apps can make it easy to copy and paste. And again, if you have something in there already, it's saved in there. So this is, again, it comes back to the initial part of it's going to suck. But once you can get things dialed in, it becomes a lot easier there. Again, gave you some strategies. It's like, hey, meal prep, eating the same foods can be helpful. Pre-logging is another one, right? Where you log your food early in the day and then you just eat it versus logging as you go. That can be a pain in the ass. Or again, like if you just log at the end of the day, because I think the more that you have to do, the less likely you are to want to do it. Whereas if we can do it ahead of time, or we can do it, not save it till the end of the day or at the end of the week, you're going to be better off. Plus, if you do it at the end of the day, you're more likely to underreport. So there's that as well too. And at the end of the day, there is no right approach to this. You can go all the way on one side of the spectrum where it's like, you're going to track everything all the time. And then there's everything on the other end where it's, and everything in between from there and all the way to, hey, I'm not going to track and log anything. So you have everything in between. And you don't have to be at one or the other. There's all that. There's a ton of space in between where you can be at. So hopefully some of the food scale stuff helped there. And again, don't be afraid to take dedicated breaks from it. This is why I'm a huge fan of teaching clients. Like this comes back to the tracking versus logging. I want to teach you how to eat right, because if we do that, if you can build that skill and you can learn what food choices to make, that skill state, if you build that skill, then you don't have to always track all the time. We don't have to track every last calorie and macro, because again, it does get old after a while. while, and it is a pain in the ass. So don't be afraid to take dedicated breaks. And then also, though, don't be afraid to, if you do take a dedicated break, to recalibrate every once in a while. I think that's another great way to go about it. But you may find that you work on all the, like, my goal with clients is, hey, we work on all these habits. And after a certain amount of time, it's like, now you don't necessarily feel like you need to track all the time. You really can just track when you want to. And when it's maybe you're in a fat loss phase or some sort of dedicated phase there, or maybe you don't track ever again. And we just come up with strategies and habits that allow you to manage your overall caloric intake without having to do that. So next question is, should women take creatine? And luckily, there was a new paper that just came out from Abby Smith Ryan and others titled Creatine in Women's Health, Bridging the Gap from Menstruation Through Pregnancy to Menopause. And really, to sum it up, women need it more than men, right? So yes, women should and need to take creatine. I hate to say they need, but they should, right? Women have approximately 20% lower endogenous creatine synthesis. So basically, again, like they're already at a deficit there. And on top of it, women have 30 to 40% lower dietary intake compared to men. So this probably comes down to like meat and like protein in general, right? As why that is. Hormonal fluctuations during menstruation, pregnancy, and menopause can affect creatine metabolism, so impacting its effectiveness. So almost during those periods of time, you almost need more, like you need it more during those times potentially. Benefits across life stages. Creatine supplementation has been shown to enhance muscle strength, exercise performance, and body composition, especially when combined with resistance training and premenopause. And again, it can help with the menstrual cycle, right? Part of it's like a cellular hydration thing. So creatine kinase activity varies across the menstrual cycle with potential implications for energy, metabolism, and performance. Supplementation may help stabilize energy levels and improve performance, particularly during phases with hormonal fluctuations. Again, like the luteal phase of your menstrual cycle it can be super helpful from that perspective. And when it comes to cellular hydration, like basically with this, women, so estrogen fluctuations during the menstrual cycle can shift water outside the cell, potentially decreasing cellular hydration and function. Can help stabilize that shift and support better training, performance, recovery, and cellular function, particularly during the luteal phase or perimenopause, when fluid balance and energy systems are more taxed. And when we can improve our cellular hydration, basically it's going to help with improve blood flow and nutrient transport. This supports recovery, mitochondrial function, and general cellular health, especially important during phases with higher energy demands or hormonal fluctuations like the luteal phase or during peri and postmenopause there, right? Be helpful from that standpoint. And then we're looking at pregnancy. Emerging evidence suggests creatine may support fetal development and maternal health, though more human studies are needed on this. As I was reading the paper, basically it was saying that like right after birth, you may find that like your body depletes it more. And so again, that can be a time that you potentially need that more there. Postmenopause supplementation may aid in preserving muscle mass, improving bone health, and enhancing cognitive function. Cognitive and mood enhancement. Creatine may improve mood and cognitive function, potentially alleviating symptoms of depression and mental fatigue. Sleep quality. Supplementation has been associated with improved sleep duration and quality, particularly on resistance training days. To me, because of women, like all this to me means that, hey, women likely should consume creatine. They should have supplement with creatine. As far as like loading or doses, I think 5 to 10 grams a day is more than enough to reap all the benefits there. With this paper coming out, the other research in terms of creatine, to me, it's a no-brainer. And I just think everybody should consume creatine, just because again, the risk is low and the rewards are high, especially for women there, right? It's like even that risk versus reward is even higher for women than it is for men there. Cool. So last question is, how much conditioning do you need to do throughout the week? Does low or high intensity matter for like adaptations? So in terms of how much, right? And again, the goal of this person is to improve body comp, plus just have decent cardio fitness, right? Like they're not trying to be the best endurance athlete in the world. So I think 2 to 3 per week would be enough for most people who have just lifted and haven't done any dedicated conditioning work in the past. So if you're someone who is body comp focused, you just want to have decent cardio fitness, but you've never focused on it in the past, 2 to 3 times per week is more than enough, right? You're looking at 2 medium/lower intensity sessions around 20 to 60 minutes, and then 1 higher intensity interval style. It can be 4x4, 5x5, 5 minutes on, 3 minutes off for X amount of time, right? Or for however many rounds you want to do there. I think you could start lower, you could build it up, just see, and then you could work all the way down to say 1 minute intervals as well too, right? And that should build a good base and see some cardiovascular adaptations. Now, if you really want to push cardiovascular fitness, you may need to push the frequency a bit more. So you may need to start doing a little bit more, right? 2 to 3 is not enough. If you are doing 2 to 3, you could add another day, or you could just add the time, like, right? Like it would just be progressive overload for endurance type training, right? Where it's like, hey, you're going to add some reps, weight, stuff like that. Same thing. You could add some intensity. You could add a little bit more volume in terms of like duration. But at some point, you would likely, if you really want to maximize things, at some point you would need to increase the frequency because you can only do so much volume in one day there. Now, in terms of high and low intensity, there was not a recent study, but it did get brought to my attention here. Let me pull this up. So effects of exercise training on mitochondrial and capillary growth in human skeletal muscle. And really what they found is high and low intensity works, okay, to help with mitochondrial adaptations, VO2 max. So you can really train with high and low intensity. High intensity is going to have a quicker, more short-term effect. And so whereas the longer duration, it's going to be a little bit longer, but like the progression's wider and it's going to allow for more progression over time. So you need to have both. That's why I think you should do some high intensity and some low intensity work. Because again, the high intensity is going to give you those quick adaptations, but they'll stall out a lot quicker. And really to go further from that, you need to make sure you're doing some form of longer duration, lower intensity type training as well too. So it could be something where, hey, for 3 to 6 months, you're doing 2 and 1, and then maybe for 3 to 4 months, you're doing all three, lower to medium intensity, and then you go back, right? There's multiple ways that you can go about it there. So this is why, again, I'm a huge fan of doing the shorter duration, or sorry, the longer duration, lower intensity stuff from time to time. Now, what that looks like is that doesn't mean that's not necessarily just zone 2 that you need to do, right? You could do zone 3-ish, especially if you can only do 2 days a week and they're 30 to 45 minutes, you can probably push zone 3. Now, if you can do more and you can do more days overall, then we may need to look at potentially adding in a little bit more quote unquote zone 2 type work there. So hopefully that was helpful. That is it for this episode. Again, just as a reminder, I have my free body recomp checklist, 10 things that you need for body recomp. Plus I go into what body recomp is, what it isn't. If you haven't yet, give me a follow on Instagram, Jeff HOEHN_. That's where I'm most active on social media. You can ask me any questions on about the podcast or any questions in general. And then lastly, if you found this podcast to be helpful in any way, if you could leave a rating and review, and that will help more people find this podcast. So that's it for this episode. I'll chat with you guys next time.